I think what happens to good men and women when they are apathetic and complacent about the ills that they see in our world is that they allow the others to rule and to become the examples of what our children and our children's children have to follow.
So Standing in the Gap is about giving back. It's about showing up for people who have no one else to show up for them. I am Dr. Tonjua Williams, president of St. Petersburg College, and you are listening to Standing in the Gap. Hello there. I hope everything's going well for you. Welcome to the Standing in the Gap podcast. Today we have a special guest, Gary T. Hartfield. Gary is an amazing entrepreneur. He also owns 6 residential homes called Serenity Village. He is also a person who gives his money. He is a philanthropist. He does a lot for our community. And today we're going to have a great conversation about how he stands in the gap. Gary, how are you doing today?
I am doing wonderful. Thank you for having me.
We are so glad that you are here. You know, you wear so many hats in our community, and I want you to just give us a real brief overview of what all you're up to and what's been happening lately.
So, wow, that's going to take a little time to go through all of that, but I'll give you the condensed version.
All right.
So,
okay.
Of course, first and foremost, I am a father. So I have a young lady that has just graduated Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. She graduated magna cum laude.
Wow.
With her degree in biology. I was able to travel to Illinois and bring her back home to Tampa, where she'll be at the University of South Florida playing volleyball.
Wow.
And working on her master's. And I have a 12-year-old son, and he is playing every sport known to man. So I am his personal Uber, as well as he plays in the band. So he is very active. I'm so proud of both of them, and they keep me tremendously active. In addition, I am a serial entrepreneur and very involved in the community as an advocate, trying to identify ways just to make our local, state, and national community better and support that in any way possible.
Wow, I mean, that is a lot that you have going on. And I want to ask you, you know, how do you do it? I mean, you're on several boards, you participate in the community, you have your own businesses, you actually are a philanthropist. And so how does that work for you? How do you find balance to be able to do all of that?
So, excellent question. I am completing my second book. The title of it is Journey to Success.
Wow.
So, as I talked about how to find balance in my book, the first thing that I really wanted to bring home was that there's no real definition of how do you manage time. Time is an ever fluid, moving process, right? What we can do, however, is make sure that the time that we're spending, that we are careful about how we spend that time, that we identify on our calendar and with support staff, the best time to really make effective use of our competencies and our resources.
Wow.
And then from there, move from the scheduling into the active participation and into the community, into the business with children, and making sure that you're moving from just a schedule into actual implementation. So I think for me, that's been helpful, having one, identified that I can't manage time. There's absolutely no way, right? But being thoughtful about the process and then investing into those things that are important to me and making sure that I show up for those important causes.
Wow. Well, you know, you mentioned that you're a serial entrepreneur.
Yes.
I know that means something there. So how did you decide? I mean, healthcare, you're doing the homes, you're insurance, you're just doing all of these things. How did you decide what to get involved in, and why were those things important to you?
So with healthcare, that was kind of a decision that I fell into based on the love and respect for my youngest sister, Tammy. We started the opportunity and potential to go into assisted living and group homes for the elderly and developmentally disabled back in 2000. And she was a recovering cocaine addict. So we talked about it. She had been clean for 5 years. And I said, you know what? I really want to make this investment in my sister, make sure that she understands that I and the rest of my family believe in her and that she can move forward in her life doing what she's passionate about. So I had just finished my MBA at the University of West Florida, and we did the research, wrote the business plan, and in December 21st of 2002, we were able to close on a small assisted living facility in Seminole, Florida, here in Pinellas County. And Tammy named it Serenity Village. And as most of you are aware, the name Serenity was derived from the Serenity Prayer, which is familiar in the rooms of recovery for Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, and so forth. So that's where the name Serenity Village came from. So December 21st, we close. We're in the Clearwater area. We go to Carrabba's to have lunch and celebrate this occasion. I come back to Tammy's apartment. She goes to work at the Columbia here at the pier.
At the restaurant,
Yep. And it was a Columbia restaurant at the pier. And I'm taking a nap and I get ready to make my way back home. At that time, I was living in the Sanford, Orlando area. So about 12 hours later, my father calls me and says, Gary, we can't get Tammy to breathe. And given Tammy's past, we were struggling with her in a 20-year addiction with cocaine. There would be times where my sister couldn't be found for weeks. And there was actually one time where she was found in the Oklahoma area in an abandoned field, and she had been left for dead. But amazingly, she had always been able to recover and bounce back. So that's what I was thinking, that Tammy would be okay. She's hurt maybe, but she'd be okay.
All right.
And a few minutes later, my father called and said, Gary, she's dead. So now imagine it's 12 to 14 hours after we've closed on this business, a major milestone in our life. And now the person who was supposed to run the business, who I had invested every resource that I had up until that time into getting this business started with her. And she has now passed on. So I had to make a decision. And remember, this is December 21st, 2002 now. So it's 3 days before Christmas. And instead of celebrating this milestone with my family and my sister, we are planning the funeral services for my sister, who at the time was 32, 33 years old, and I was 30. So here we are planning the funeral services and trying to figure out how do we move forward. Because I'm working in corporate America and I'm thinking I want to continue this career and maybe become the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. But now I have to pivot and either try and rescind this offer that we've made or continue with their legacy. So fast forward 20 plus years later, we continue with the legacy, and I'm prayerful that we honored Tammy's legacy by growing that single assisted living facility with 8 residents and 1.5 employees to almost 8 facilities between Pinellas, Hillsborough, and Polk County, with almost 200 residents that we served every day and 100 plus employees.
You know, you mentioned to me at one point, that is why the majority of what you do is called Serenity and Serenity Village. So, I mean, it took grit and fortitude to forge forward and at the loss of your sister. How did you pick up and just kind of keep going? How did you do that?
So it was tough. I will not make light of that. In the interest of sounding magnanimous, I would love to, make light of it. It was very tough. My sister and I were very close. She was the person who could get me to do almost anything. I loved her in a very special way. So finding the grit came from two places, I believe. And one was my mother. And she instilled into us this, you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. So understanding not just the superficial words of what's being said, but when you actually get into understanding the strength that our Creator has, and that He created all things, including my sister that passed.
That's true.
In understanding that I could do all things but fail through Christ. So I was able to harness that strength. And also just understanding as a high school athlete, understanding that we bought into this idea that we have a we don't quit attitude. We may get tired. We may take a rest. We may get weary, but we don't quit. So with those two things in mind, I was able to move forward. And that's not to say it wasn't tough, but we definitely found the intestinal fortitude necessary to move forward.
You know, Gary, I definitely admire everything that you're doing. And it's very obvious that you're standing in the gap for a population that most of us don't even think about. When you talk about the elderly and those who have different disabilities or abilities that are different, that has kind of been your passion when you talk about your group homes and the population that you're looking at. So you're really standing in the gap for this group, right? Because there's not a lot of people whose focus is definitely on our elderly in that way.
Yes.
What were you thinking? What does that mean to you, especially standing in the gap for that group?
First, the idea, the passion was my sister's. It was Tammy's. She had a natural affinity, a true passion, a heart's calling for serving the intellectually and developmentally disabled, as well as the elderly. So as the baton was passed to me due to her untimely passing, I had to become familiar with the populations, right? So in my experience, I did the theory. I did the business plan. I did the research. So I was tremendous with the theory, but the actual implementation again, the actual work, the actual relationships that you establish with these loving individuals was not a part of the decision set that I had decided on. That was Tammy's decision set. So for me, as I continue to now be in an intimate place, in an intimate setting where I had to help individuals shower, where I had to provide food, where I had to provide medications, where I had to sometimes even change their diapers. It truly changes. Yeah, my perception and how I interfaced with these individuals, because it was important, because you can't minister, you can't provide care for any population if you don't understand that population, if you don't love that population.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so for our listeners in the audience, I want you to understand what Mr. Hartfield just stated. If you're going to be standing in the gap, and if you're going to be passionate about what you're doing, you've got to be all in.
Yes.
You cannot tiptoe in this thing. You have to jump in and be involved and really get to know the individuals you're trying to stand in the gap for. And I know, Mr. Hartfield, that changed a lot of their lives to know that you're willing to actually come and do some of the things that folks are like, I don't want to do.
Yes.
And you're like, hey, I'm going to learn how to do this.
Yes.
And so when you've done that, what has been some of the feedback you've received from some of the individuals that you've served in the way that you just described?
So what I have received that really touches my heart is that my staff have seen me not only help make strategic decisions about how we make $1 million investments, but they've also seen me clean bathrooms. They've also seen me wrap my arms around our clients and spend time with them and help redirect them when maybe they're having a bad behavioral issue. So for me, I think a lot of times as leaders, you hear leaders give directives, you hear them give mandates, but there's no real person behind that. So it's easier to stand behind a desk, to stand behind a podium or a pulpit
That's right.
and give directives and mandates. But when you show up and you're actually doing the work with your staff, that's a whole different level of respect.
Yeah.
And if you really want staff to go to bat for you, if you really want them to truly be loyal to the mission of what it is that you're trying to do, let them see you do the work, not just stand behind the podium or the desk or wherever you may stand and just give a directive. But when you're actually doing the work, it makes a difference. I think there's an author that quoted one time, and the quote goes that, whenever possible, preach the gospel. Do it as fervently and with as much power as you can. And when absolutely necessary, use words. So in that quote, what he was saying was that let your work speak for you.
Exactly. You know, I'm thinking about your employees
Yes.
and standing in the gap. And you've shown them how to do the work. Were there any times when you felt like you literally had to stand in the gap for your employees to help them with the mission or to help them through whatever they were going through?
Absolutely. I try to be intentional about that, in that we do not want to just create a job.
Yeah.
We want to create careers.
That's right.
For individuals. So in standing in the gap, I understood that I had been entrusted with not only their careers, but the fidelity, the ability for them to bring home resources for their families. And how that impacted the communities, because we don't have a strong community if we don't have strong families. So I, in my small part in that, had a way to impact that. So I took that responsibility very seriously. And in doing so, we would have our monthly manager meetings. And we'd have an opportunity not only to share about technical issues, compliance-related issues, and building systems within the organization, but we would also get into spiritual ideas, spiritual principles that needed to be an integral part of the process. So we would often have maybe a podcast from T.D. Jakes or other spiritual leaders that maybe spoke on a concept, and then we expand on the concept and help them understand how that applies to their work that we do every day. Whether you're the COO or CEO, or if you are the person that's cleaning the restrooms, this applies to you.
So we have a lot of college students who want to be entrepreneurs.
Yes.
They're always talking about, I want my own business. I want to do this or that. What advice would you give a young person who has a passion for something on how to get it started? What do they do first?
So for me, anytime that I'm working with someone that is interested in being an entrepreneur, the first thing I ask is, where's the business plan? In doing that, I'm asking a couple questions. So the literal question is, where's the business plan? The figurative question is, have you done the work? So
done the research.
Absolutely. So with that requires a level of dedication, a level of purpose, and a level of passion, because it's not easy to develop a business plan. You're going to have to do the work. And I want to know, when we start that conversation, have you thought about it? Two, are you willing to do the work? Even if you haven't done it, are you willing to do the work? Because I'm going to give you everything that I have, but I have to know that you're willing to do the same.
And I think that's so true for our individuals out there in the audience who are saying they want to be an entrepreneur. Mr. Hartfield just made it clear, you've got to do the research. You have to have a business plan. And there has to be some passion behind your purpose. You can't just select, I want to be this because that's a good field. If it doesn't fit you and your personality, it's going to be tough.
Absolutely.
You know, you chose different projects and initiatives like COVID-19 and going through the pandemic. And how do you decide what parts of standing in the gap you want to do, and what parts you're like, that's not for me?
No, for me, deciding where we pour our resources into, our time, talent, and our treasure is based on a calling and passion and purpose. Because without those, it can't be a sustainable and intentional effort. It has to be something that's called beyond just that moment. It has to be something that resonates with your heart. So for us, one of the things that resonates with our heart is social justice. So as we're coming out of 2020, it's COVID-19, and there are a number of issues going on in our country, probably the most tumultuous in this part of the 21st century. So as we look at our news, we saw the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and so forth. In addition, we saw COVID-19 kill millions of individuals in the state of Florida, in our country, and throughout the world in a very short amount of time. And disparately, those individuals look like you and I, but they just exacerbated the issues that were already existent in our communities. The health disparities, the financial disparities, all those things already existed, but when you have a global pandemic, it exponentially exacerbates all of those issues. So there were a number of different protests, even around the world. There were a number of different marches, and all those things are important, but we thought, how do we make these things sustainable? How do we engineer a process where we come up with solutions that effectuate long-term change? So with that became the All Hart Foundation and the Refinery Exchange.
Wow. You know, I think people in the audience are probably going to want to know, we come up with these solutions. Have we ever had any failures? Anything that kind of didn't quite go the way you wanted it to go, but you're like, this is really where we need to go, but it didn't work. Give us an example, and what did you do after that?
So it is important to understand for the audience, and I listen to this mantra for myself every day. And it's actually, again, something that I've included into my book. And the first chapter speaks to this. As a leader, as an entrepreneur, as anyone that has been chosen to be out front, know that failure, that trials and tribulations, that adversity is an integral part of the process. And if you're not willing to endure that, then you don't have yet the necessary components to be successful as a leader and as the person out front, because that is an undeniable and that is a immutable truth as it relates to being a leader and someone that is trying to lead an initiative, be an entrepreneur. Those things will happen. For example, I shared with you earlier about the adversity I suffered when my sister passed. One of the other examples I wanted to share with you really quickly is Pastor T.D. Jakes. So he had just written the book, Woman, Thou Art Loose. The book was on a trajectory that was doing extremely well. It was a bestseller nationally and internationally. Individuals were calling him about bringing the book to the big screen. So he's experiencing tremendous success. And then at that same time, in his own household, his 13-year-old daughter tells him she is pregnant. So talk about adversity. Now, this is your 13-year-old daughter who is probably just coming into puberty. You are on a meteoric rise and you are a leader. You are a pastor. And now the question comes, how can you lead
with
a congregation?
With that,
how can you lead the rest of the world in your ministry and you can't even take care of this 13-year-old daughter that's in your home? That's what the naysayers are going to say. That's what the haters are going to say. So for the leaders, for the entrepreneurs, how do you get past that? What's in your gut? What's in you? What's in your heart that's going to help you get past that moment and know that your moment is right now and that you have to show up and that your intestinal fortitude has to take you past that moment and know that through God, all things are possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, what Mr. Hartfield's also talking about is failing forward,
Yes.
being comfortable in the skin you're in, to not always get it right the first time, or to go through adversity and continue to forge forward. You know, I think that there's not one leader who has risen to success who has not had some failure. And so for our audience, I think that we have to learn how to be comfortable being uncomfortable. We have to learn how to be comfortable with the what ifs that don't work, or what if something happens that we can't control. It just happened. And so being comfortable in the skin you're in is going to get you far when you're moving forward. And I think a lot of those faith-based principles are also very helpful.
Absolutely.
You know, as well. We've talked about your extensive career. What's next? Like where you going next? What you got that you're working on?
So for me, I am the consummate entrepreneur. So I am always looking at opportunities to build and opportunities to pour into others. So I have dubbed myself as a social engineer.
Okay.
So my undergraduate degree was in engineering from Florida A&M University. I've never used the degree. I have all of the technical skills, all the analytical skills, but I never used the degree. And really shortly, I didn't use the degree because I didn't want to major in engineering. My mother lived vicariously through me and wanted me to be an engineer. She had no idea what that meant in terms of the curriculum, the intensity of the study.
She knew it was going to be good, though.
Yeah, she knew it was going to be good. Yes. So she loved the idea of her baby boy being an engineer, but she had no idea of what that meant in terms of the different levels of math and science that are required to complete that degree. So I think for me, what's next is continuing to look for ways to be the builder that I think I've been called to be, to build people and maybe to build businesses and continue to serve our community in a very impactful way, in a way that I hope that maybe is a little bit different from what we've been seeing here lately, to bring an example of the change that we want to see.
Wow. You know, to the audience, he brings about a good point here. And I'd like for you to expound a little bit more, to share with us what will happen if we do not have people who will stand in the gap, who will go to that. What's going to happen to our world if we all just do all in for us?
So I think what happens, and I've studied this a lot, so that's a tremendous question. I think what happens to good men and women when they are apathetic and complacent about the ills that they see in our world is that they allow the others to rule and to become the examples of what our children and our children's children have to follow. So what you are doing is, in your complacency and in your apathy, is you're giving license for those individuals not only to continue the type of destructive politics that you may see in our local community or in our country, if you give license to that, but also know that those same politics will have effect on your children and your children's children, because those policies that are being put in place not only affect you in this moment, but they will affect generations to come.
Wow. So, Mr. Hartfield, you sit on a lot of boards, councils, you have a lot of businesses, and the community is weighing in on what you're doing, and you're actively involved. How do you decide in all those spaces how much you give of yourself and what you do? How do you know what you're on this committee? How do you know which way to go here and what you're going to do with that?
So it's important for me to be able to understand the implications of policies from our different county and state agencies, but also our local agencies that directly impact my family, my staff, as well as my fellow community members. So in doing that, I've identified several councils and committees and boards that I love to serve on, that I may be able to bring some level of insight or competency to, but also it allows me the opportunity to learn. So in that, although I'm not always playing the role of a leader, I'm able to learn. So for instance, I've learned with United Way Suncoast that nearly half of our families in the Bay Area are at or below the ALICE level, meaning they are one paycheck away from financial destruction and maybe homelessness. So in that, what we understand is that for our staff, those are real issues. For our community, that's a real issue. So as we're talking about building multi-billion-dollar projects here in the Tampa Bay area, we also have to consider how our family is doing, how our students are doing in our public schools. So those things are an integral part of how we continue to move in our community. So it's great to have multi-billion-dollar projects going on in our community, but when half of the families in our community are at or below the ALICE level, how do we have those conversations with staff, with policymakers to make sure that educators are getting paid what they need to get paid to survive and thrive in our community, because they bring an essential part of the process, the education process for our children. And if nothing else, we learned that coming out of COVID.
Absolutely.
So our nurses are suffering if they are living in a community where they can't afford to live. Those are essential service. Those are our educators, and our nurses are first responders. So if they can't afford to live in our community, then we have an issue. So for me, serving on those boards, and most of the time they're not in a leadership role, but in a role to listen, to learn, and be able to have intelligent conversation and discourse where maybe I can affect policy or have a conversation with Dr. Williams and share where my heart is as it relates to these concerns.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, you just heard one of the most inspirational support service leaders in the Tampa Bay area, maybe in Florida, Gary Hartfield, who talked about how he stands in the gap for our elderly, for individuals with intellectual disabilities, even for his own employees, to make sure that they are successful and that their families live a good life. This has been amazing. Thank you for joining us.